The Panama Papers. Just imagine that you've got this secret cookie jar stashed away, hidden from everyone. Your curious neighbors, your sneaky cat, and even your grandma who's convinced you've sworn off sweets for good. Then someone finds your hidden stash and shares the news with everyone in the neighborhood. That's pretty much what went down with the Panama Papers, but on a massive global level. So back in 2016, someone anonymously tipped off the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, and they ended up passing the info along to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The cat was out of the bag. It turns out that Mossack Fonseca, the law firm in Panama, was like the go-to cookie jar for the wealthy and well-known. They were all about helping their clients stash away money and assets in offshore accounts, keeping them out of sight from tax collectors and regulators. Out of nowhere, more than 11.5 million documents got leaked to the press, and journalists around the globe were buzzing with excitement all over the juicy details. It felt like someone had just opened Pandora's box, but instead of unleashing evil spirits, out came a flurry of bank statements and corporate records. They brought up the names of well-known figures, politicians, business tycoons, and a few pretty sketchy individuals. Even the Prime Minister of Iceland ended up on that list and had to step down because of all the allegations swirling around. Countries began to look into things, some people lost their jobs, and everyone saw just how inventive folks can be with their cash when they really want to keep it to themselves. It felt like discovering that your favorite magician had been pulling a fast one all along. Instead of making rabbits appear from hats, they were just conjuring up cash out of nowhere. Watergate Scandal. It all kicked off on June 17, 1972, during President Richard Nixon's campaign for re-election. It seemed like someone in his camp thought it was a brilliant move to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters. I mean, really, nothing screams democracy like illegal surveillance, right? So they sent in 5 guys to break into the headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. Their mission? To plant wiretaps and steal documents. It was kinda like the political version of sneaking a look at your rival's diary, like trying to catch a glimpse of someone's texts when they step away from the phone, but way more against the law. And these guys really weren't the brightest, huh? They got caught right in the act by a security guard who spotted some tape on a door latch. Alright, here's where it starts to get really interesting. The White House and Nixon's administration began to deny any connection to the break-in, but as the investigation progressed, it became obvious that this rabbit hole was much deeper than Alice in Wonderland. So, it turns out Nixon's administration was mixed up in a whole bunch of illegal stuff, like hush money payments, destroying evidence, and way more cover-ups than a teenager trying to hide their acne. A major turning point came when it was revealed that Nixon had this habit of secretly recording all his conversations and meetings in the Oval Office. As a side note, just a little tip, if you're thinking of doing something illegal, it might be a good idea to skip the whole evidence vault thing. The tapes from Nixon really had all the proof of his role in the cover-up. Nixon was pretty much staring down the barrel of impeachment, so he chose to resign instead, but then the next president came along and pardoned him. And now, here's the wildest part, Nixon didn't just go down quietly. The tapes, those tapes, were basically the smoking gun that sealed his fate. They were like his very own Pandora's box, and once they were made public, it was clear there was no escaping it. The tapes revealed Nixon's direct involvement in the cover-up, and they showed him doing everything from trying to stop the FBI investigation to orchestrating the hush money payments. It's like if your boss was caught in the act of committing fraud, and then you found out they'd been secretly recording all the meetings about it. So, as the pressure mounted, Nixon knew it was over. In a truly shocking twist, he became the first US president to resign, and while the scandal left a permanent stain on his legacy, it opened the door for Vice President Gerald Ford to take over, and in an equally shocking move, Ford decided to pardon Nixon, which left many scratching their heads. WikiLeaks. This was like putting everyone's dirty laundry out for the whole world to see. So, it's 2006, and here comes Julian Assange, an Australian guy with a knack for hacking and a flair for stirring things up as he kicks off WikiLeaks. Imagine it as the Pandora's box filled with all those hidden government and corporate secrets. Assange aimed to simplify whistleblowing, making it as straightforward as online shopping. Only, instead of picking out shoes, you're sharing and exposing government wrongdoing. There was this big leak where a video came out showing a US military helicopter attack in Baghdad, which people referred to as collateral murder. The report revealed that the military took the lives of several civilians, which include 2 journalists from Reuters. It felt a bit like Call of Duty, but with real-life stakes. The video really got people talking and stirred up a lot of debate about the ethics of war. So, back in 2010, WikiLeaks dropped a bombshell with over 75,000 documents about the war in Afghanistan, and just like that, it felt like everyone turned into an armchair diplomat, chatting about foreign policy as if They were debating the latest reality TV drama. Governments around the globe weren't exactly thrilled, treating Assange as if he were handing out their most cringeworthy high school yearbook photos. The US government's response was pretty much just get rid of that footage, but on a worldwide level. So Assange turned into this international man of mystery, traveling from one country to another. He ended up finding shelter in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he hung out for 7 years and kept on with his mission. Then in 2019, Ecuador decided to take away his asylum, and the UK government went ahead and arrested him. The Pentagon Papers. So here's a bit of context. After the Vietnam War, the US put together a super-secret Department of Defense study known as the Pentagon Papers. This was all about looking into their political and military involvement from 1945 to 1967, so it turns out that Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense back then, had this report commissioned. It showed that the government had been pretty much lying to both the public and Congress about their role in the Vietnam War. They had quietly expanded their actions and conducted coastal raids on North Vietnam along with Marine Corps attacks. Daniel Ellsberg wasn't too happy about this, especially since he had worked on the study. The guy was really upset and chose to play the role of Robin Hood by sharing the information with the public, thinking they deserved to know what he believed was the truth. It's kinda like when you're watching a horror movie and then you just feel like everyone has to find out who the real monster in the closet is. Back in 1969, Ellsberg and his buddy Anthony Russo decided to take a big leap. They began secretly photocopying all 7,000 pages of the Pentagon Papers. It was a huge task that took months and came with some serious risks. He initially reached out to some members of Congress to get the documents released, but when they turned him down, he decided to go to the press instead. And you know what? The New York Times totally took the bait. The press kicked off a bunch of articles using those documents, and honestly, it's fair to say the info stirred up quite the national commotion. The deadline could easily have said government caught with their pants down. The president was definitely not happy and really let everyone involved have it. He attempted to put a stop to the Times by slapping an injunction on them, but the Washington Post stepped in and began publishing the documents as well. It felt like playing whack-a-mole with journalists, as more newspapers kept popping up every time he tried to shut one down. So Ellsberg faced some serious charges like conspiracy, espionage, and theft of government property, but guess what? Those charges got tossed out once investigators figured out they didn't have a solid chance in court. The guy was pretty much viewed as a hero by everyone, and then in June 2011, the documents that made up the Pentagon Papers were declassified and made public. Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was this tech genius who was working as a contractor for the National Security Agency. Then, one day, he made the leap from being just another tech guy to becoming the star of his own international spy thriller. And honestly, it turned out to be quite the blockbuster. Everything started to unravel back in 2013 when Edward spilled the beans about the NSA gathering info on just about everyone and everything. Picture this. Your most curious neighbor is snooping through your windows, but instead of glass, these windows are digital and the NSA is playing the role of that nosy neighbor. Edward thought it was important for the public to understand just how much data the NSA was collecting. I mean, they were basically eavesdropping on every phone call, going through every email and message, and even checking out those selfies you thought were just for you and maybe a little embarrassing. Edward used his clearance to dive into different databases and snagged tens of thousands of documents. He reached out to journalists at big news media companies and pretty much revealed how the NSA was like a stalker, knowing way too much about everyone. Governments around the globe seemed like they were caught red-handed, just like kids sneaking cookies from the jar. Some people thought Snowden was really brave, while others labeled him a traitor, but honestly, he didn't seem to care at all. To steer clear of any uncomfortable chats with the US government regarding his new role as a whistleblower, Snowden first made his way to Hong Kong, but later received asylum from the Russian government in 2022. So, over in the US, the whole situation sparked a big conversation about privacy, security, and just how many cat videos the government actually needs to check out. Even though the NSA tweaked their surveillance programs, folks still believed that the snooping was far from over. DNC email leak. This leak popped up right in the thick of the 2016 US presidential campaign and pretty much transformed the whole situation into a real-life soap opera. Once again, it all went down because of WikiLeaks, the internet's go-to whistleblower, or maybe troublemaker, depending on your perspective. So there was this leak that let out almost 20,000 emails from DNC officials. It really showed what was going on behind the scenes with the Democratic Party's communications and strategies. The emails revealed that the DNC wasn't really on board with feeling the burn and actually preferred Hillary Clinton to take the primaries. Just think about the chaos that would create. The DNC was meant to be this neutral referee, but it really looked like they were rooting for one side all along. Sanders supporters were really upset, and the leak just made the already intense primary season even more heated. Even the DNC chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, stepped down quicker than you can say cheese because of how damaging it all was. But wait, it gets even more interesting. The plot really thickened when US intelligence agencies started blaming Russian hackers. So they say that these hackers got into the DNC's computer systems and swiped the emails to mess with the election and shake people's trust in the democratic process. But here's the kicker. This leak didn't just shake up the DNC, it had a ripple effect on the entire political landscape. Not only did the emails expose the bias within the Democratic Party, but they also fueled conspiracy theories and distrust among both sides of the aisle. It was like opening a can of worms, but instead of worms, you got a whole buffet of scandal, manipulation, and shady backroom deals. The leaked emails show everything from DNC staffers mocking Bernie Sanders to discussions about how to discredit his supporters. It was like watching a reality TV show where everyone's acting like they're in control, but behind the scenes, it's total chaos. And while the Russian hacking allegations made things even messier, the damage had already been done. People were left questioning the integrity of the election process, and the whole thing felt like the beginning of a political thriller with no clear ending. Paradise Papers. Oh, for sure, Paradise Papers. This was basically the follow-up to the Panama Papers. You could almost call it tax evasion 2.0 since it came right on the heels of the Panama Papers scandal just the very next year, 2017. To start with, everyone was still reeling from what had gone down the year before when, out of nowhere, another bomb was just dropped right in front of them. This time, they were talking about a law firm based in Bermuda called Appleby, which honestly sounds like a spot you'd want to visit for a getaway. So, in a sense, it kind of was, but the vacation ended up costing you, right? The wealthy and influential were stashing their cash in sunny tax havens like Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and even the Isle of Man. Those spots were like luxury resorts for cash, where money could just chill out without any tax worries. A leak revealed 13.4 million documents that showed how politicians, celebrities, and corporations were using offshore havens to dodge taxes. It felt like we were playing a game of financial Twister with everyone bending and twisting to find the best tax-saving spot. The Paradise Papers revealed that even Queen Elizabeth II, along with companies like Apple and Nike, had offshore investments. The leak also brought into the spotlight some close associates of political figures such as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. It felt like a gathering of the elite, a hall soaking up the perks of a tax-free paradise where everyone else was left to handle their responsibilities. And here's where it gets really interesting. The scope of the Paradise Papers wasn't just about rich people hiding their money, it also highlighted some pretty shady practices by companies that were supposed to be the epitome of corporate responsibility. For example, tech giants like Apple and Nike were exposed for shifting profits to countries with low or zero taxes, effectively reducing their tax bills while making billions in profits. It's like that friend who always forgets their wallet when it's time to pay for dinner. Meanwhile, the public and small businesses are left footing the bill. The papers also connected some dots between the offshore dealings and political figures who, on paper, were all about fighting for the people, but behind the scenes, they were making sure their tax bills were as small as possible. It's kinda like realizing the magician who's been impressing you with tricks has been hiding a few things up his sleeve, and suddenly the show doesn't seem so impressive anymore. Operation Gladio. So this whole wild situation really kicked off because the Western powers were super anxious about the chance of a Soviet invasion after World War II. To lift their spirits, they came up with Operation Gladio, a super-secret NATO stay-behind operation that was so under wraps, it made the Coca-Cola recipe seem like an open book. The whole idea was to set up these covert paramilitary networks all over Western Europe. The plan was that if the Red Soviet Army came in to stir up trouble, the secret agents would hang back behind enemy lines, engage in guerrilla warfare, and really make things tough for the invaders. It felt like having a secret superhero team just waiting to jump in if things took a turn for the worse. But, you know, things got really confusing and quickly. Rather than sticking to their original purpose, those secret networks chose to turn against us instead. So it looks like Operation Gladio started getting into some pretty shady stuff with sabotage and political manipulation in Italy. Gladio was thought to have been involved in what's known as the Years of Lead, a time filled with social and political chaos characterized by bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings. They were pretty much stirring up fear among the folks they were supposed to protect and then pointing fingers at the Soviets for it. It feels like they grabbed a chapter from the How to Create Chaos 101 guidebook. So, back in 1990, things really came to light when Italy's Prime Minister, Giulio Andreotti, acknowledged the existence of Gladio. However, the complete details of their actions are still pretty murky and wrapped up in a lot of secrecy and denial. Vault 7. This was honestly the scandal that totally changed the game for digital espionage. So back in March 2017, things got really interesting when WikiLeaks came out with a huge stash of documents from the CIA, which is basically the top spy agency in the US. This wasn't just any leak, this was like discovering that your grandma's knitting club was secretly an elite hacker group. Vault 7 was basically the CIA's collection of cyber tools, like their digital Swiss Army knife, you know? It showed a wide range of hacking tools and techniques that the agency used to get into smartphones, computers, and even smart TVs. One of the coolest, or maybe the scariest tools was called Weeping Angel. It could actually turn a Samsung smart TV into a bug that recorded conversations even when it looked like it was turned off. Picture this, you're deep into a binge watch of your favorite show and your TV's just there, soaking in every word you say, or you're just enjoying a cozy Netflix and chill session with your partner, and it feels like someone's peeking at you through the TV. Another section of Vault 7 revealed how the CIA could get around the encryption on popular messaging apps such as WhatsApp and Snapchat. The leak didn't just reveal what the CIA was capable of, it really laid bare all the weaknesses in the tech we use every day. It was a real eye-opener that your smart fridge might actually be smarter than you realize, and not in a good way. But here's the kicker. The real horror show didn't stop with just showing off how deep the CIA's cyber tools could go. Vault 7 exposed the agency's ability to cover its tracks in a way that would make even the slickest hackers jealous. They had a secret way of planting malware to make it look like it came from Russia, China, or anyone else they wanted to frame. Basically, they could throw off any investigation and create a false trail, making it seem like someone else was behind the attack. It was like the CIA was playing a game of whodunit, but with no rules, and they were winning. So, as much as this leak was a jaw-dropper for the public, it also gave rise to a new wave of fear and mistrust in the world of cybersecurity. It's like opening Pandora's box and then revealing that it wasn't just full of bad stuff, but that everything around you could potentially be watching you too. Operation Northwoods. Finally, let's dive into Operation Northwoods. Buckle up because this story is like a wild plot twist from a spy thriller, only it's terrifyingly real. Picture it. It's the early 1960s. Cold War tensions between the US and Cuba were at their peak, and Fidel Castro's communist regime was giving the American government serious heartburn. Enter the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military's top brass, who were, let's say, not the sit-and-wait type. They cooked up a plan so wild it'll make your jaw drop. Their grand idea? Fake attacks on American soil and blame them on Cuba to justify going to war. Oh yeah, false flag attacks with a capital F. Now, here's where things get both absurd and horrifying. They brainstormed scenarios like they were writers for the most cynical drama you've ever seen. One suggestion, hijack a civilian aircraft, land it secretly, and send in a drone painted to look like the original. The drone would be blown out of the sky and the blame would conveniently fall on Cuba. If that doesn't make you squint at humanity, wait, there's more. They thought about orchestrating bombings on US soil, faking attacks on military bases, and even staging funerals with fake mourners. That's right, they wanted grieving families as props, because apparently nothing says freedom like making up a national tragedy for some PR. And here's where it almost spirals into comedy. Almost. When the plan reached President John F. Kennedy, he was like, hard pass. JFK wasn't about to blow up civilians for a war justification, thank you very much. To say he wasn't thrilled would be an understatement. He basically shut the whole thing down faster than a kid switching tabs when a parent walks by. But the shocking part? It wasn't just a rogue pitch. It had top-level military approval, which makes you wonder what else was on the bad idea board back then. The proposal was declassified in 1997 and people were floored. I mean, can you imagine learning your government thought, hey, what if we blew ourselves up a bit, just for effect? It's a chilling reminder of how high the stakes of Cold War paranoia can go.